friends are since.
Recently, I uploaded a short Super 8 film from Hogmanay, which is New Year's Eve for the non-Scottish amongst you. This was my first ever experiment with Super 8, and in this video I'm going to be talking a wee bit about my experience thus far with what is a medium that is very new to me. Now, my whole plan with Super 8 is to record a whole bunch of footage and mini films throughout 2024 and document the process as I go along to give some insight into what it's like to use the medium in practice, and also, to be honest, to give me something to look back on in the future when I'm hopefully something of a Super 8 god. If you're curious, I've already shared an initial video talking about why I decided to fall down this particular money pit in the first place, which I'll link somewhere below or above or wherever it goes. But I recorded that before I actually got any footage back, which some people were very annoyed about. And, you know, now that I've got some footage to talk about, well, I mean, let's talk about it. When it comes to the practical side of how I'm getting this film developed and digitised and how much it costs and all that kind of thing, I've already gone into those details a wee bit in the last video, but in short, I'm sending the cartridges off to a place called Gauge Film in England. Each roll plus scanning at 2K resolution costs about 80 Great British pounds or thereabouts, which provides about 3 minutes of footage at 18 frames per second. So it's not inexpensive, although it is relatively more affordable than other similar mechanisms like 16mm, for example. Now, I get the film scanned in log format, which means that I then have to colour correct it to taste in post-production. It gives me a bit more, leeway to do what I want with it. And I also like getting it scanned in with the overscan, so you can see a bit of the sprocket hole and all of that. In terms of film stock, on the Hogmanay I was shooting with Kodak 500T, which is, as far as I'm aware, the highest film speed that you can get for Super 8 cameras. I felt a bit like I was pushing my luck with that because the flat was set up for a party with, very minimal lighting in each room, and if I was shooting stills in the same environment, I would easily be looking at having to shoot with ISO 3200 or similar. However, it's not quite as simple as that with Super 8 because 500T is actually the same stock as CineStill branded 800T, and so there's a bit more latitude in practice than the name suggests. The nature of the type of videos that Super 8 produces and the effective shutter speed of the camera also means that, things are a wee bit different from shooting stills, and the footage actually turned out quite nicely and looks way better than I thought it might. So lesson number one is that I don't necessarily need to worry as much about low light, or perhaps more accurately, I don't need to worry about having as high ISO as much as I thought I would have to. When it comes to the camera, I was using the Canon 514 XL. This is a really popular choice with folks looking to get into Super 8 now, partly because it's really tiny and portable, right? But also because it's got this really nice f1.4 lens, which is good for shooting in lower light situations. Now, I really love the 514 XL for those reasons, but in practice I found that it was pretty difficult to focus, which is a bit of an understatement actually, because the viewfinder is really, really, really tiny, and I can barely see through it with my glasses on, never mind with them off. And on top of that, the rangefinder was almost impossible to line up. You can adjust the built-in diopter to suit your eyesight, but I found that it constantly got knocked loose, and as a result, I could never quite be sure if something was in focus or not. Now in Hogmanay, I effectively just gave up trying to focus with the rangefinder completely, and just guessed at the distance of a subject using the distance markings on the lens barrel, so zone focusing basically, which is something that I'm fairly comfortable and familiar with. But I feared that this would mean that everything was horribly out of focus, and in actual fact, it seemed to work out fairly well. It turns out that getting the focal point bang on is much less important for janky home movie style videos than it would be for photography. So that's another lesson. Overall, shooting with the 514 XL was really straightforward, and I can see why this would be a great camera for travelling with, although if size isn't a major concern, then another model might be a better choice, particularly one with a bigger viewfinder. And in fact, I've actually bought another Super 8 camera for that specific purpose, but I'll talk about that another time. Now, most Super 8 cameras require AA batteries in order to operate. Some of them also need additional button cells and stuff like that for the meter, but the 514 XL takes just 2 AA batteries, which is actually something I like about it. One interesting thing though is that the 514 XL doesn't work with rechargeable AA batteries, and neither actually do the other Super 8 cameras that I've tried. The reason for this, as far as I can tell, is that standard AA batteries are 1.5 volts each, whereas rechargeable ones are apparently only 1.2 volts each, something that I didn't know before now, but discovered when I tried to use rechargeable batteries in my Super 8 camera, and the motor just wouldn't start, and I thought it was broken. But it was just because I wasn't using regular AA batteries. Now, I don't understand at all why rechargeable cells aren't 1.5 volts, or why it doesn't seem to matter for lots of other devices, because this isn't a problem I've run into before. But it does apparently make a difference for Super 8 cameras in particular, and whatever the reason that is, it's probably something worth noting. One good thing though is that regular AA batteries do seem to last a surprisingly long time. I chucked in an old pair a few months ago that I'd found in a drawer somewhere, and they're still chugging along after me running lots and lots of cartridges through them, so you don't actually have to replace them constantly, and not being able to use rechargeable batteries is less of a big deal. It's still not great, but it's not as big a deal as I thought it would be. Now, unfortunately, about a minute or so of the footage that I got back from Hogmanay was basically just utter crap. My friend and supposed fellow photographer Lee Jones was using the Super 8 for a while and apparently didn't realise that it was completely zoomed in, to the point where he was basically not filming anything at all apart from mush. In fact, when I told him that he'd wasted like 30 quid's worth of film by zooming in this way, his response was, "That thing can zoom?" So that was something of an expensive lesson to learn. I don't really know what the lesson was, but there you have it. Generally though, I really enjoyed my first experience using the Super 8. The footage looks really cool, especially since this was basically just a messy experiment, right? An excuse to see if it worked before shooting anything especially meaningful. The results have made me excited to shoot Super 8 much more often, as expensive as it might be, and I've already sent off a bunch of films to get developed from my recent trip to Greece. Hopefully they'll actually come out, or it won't just be a huge waste of money, but another kick in my stomach and my soul, I guess, my poor flagging soul. The act of just shooting with the 514 XL itself was also a lot of fun. Despite being something of a pacifist, the camera feels excellent in your hand, kind of like you're brandishing a minigun or something like that. And there's this beautiful tactile and auditory feedback that you get when you're shooting, with the motor going click, 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 click as it runs. It's awesome, and it's something you don't get with any other digital cameras, obviously. Now, you don't get much in the way of shooting time with Super 8, which is something that's well documented. Everybody moans about that. But this does mean that there's one unexpected upside, in the sense that because you're not able to shoot constantly, it never feels like you're too much in somebody's face. In the sense that, at least I didn't feel like I was being overly intrusive with people for a sustained period of time when I was taking, the footage that I wanted to. The fact that this is a weirdo old camera also probably helps, but with just 3 minutes per cartridge, it doesn't feel like it's a constant annoying presence the way that a digital camera might. And instead, I felt that you could capture the essence of a moment, then just put the camera away and enjoy the moment, which somehow made it even more special. In other words, you're preserving the memory whilst also able to be present. And I think there's something in that, actually. One final thing that I haven't quite worked out is how frame rates work, in the sense that I'm shooting at 18 frames per second on my camera, but the time base for my project is 25 frames per second, and the digitization of the film is matched to that during scanning. And in practice, I don't really know what that means, because I had expected to get a 3-minute 20-second recording back, but I just got about 2 minutes, which I'm sure must be something to do with the frames per second, but I can't quite wrap my brain around that, at least not yet anyway. In the end, I stretched the footage out a wee bit to match the music that I was using, which I'm sure is sacrilege, right? But I didn't really see any significant difference, although I guess that's something to figure out for another day. If you do happen to understand this, please do explain, because I don't really have any idea, like with many things, actually. So the TLDR from shooting my first Super 8 film is that it turned out much better than I expected it to, And now that my expectations have been suitably raised, hopefully I won't be too disappointed by the results from the other films that I've shot and that I am going to be shooting. Which, let's face it, I probably will.